Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency is called to order. Clerk, will you please conduct the roll call?
Director Robinson?
Present.
Director White?
Present.
Director Cardoza?
Present.
Director Brown?
Here.
Director Crane is absent at the moment. And Chair Brown.
Here. I'd like to do a Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to invite Aaron from Department of Water Resources to lead us.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. We do have one item on the consent, and that's approval of minutes from the August 10th, 2017 meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Brown, a second by Director Cardoza. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Next, we'll go to our staff updates.
Is this on? Okay. Sarah DeKett, Mendocino County Water Agency. I just want to give you a quick update about the Proposition 1 grant. The final solicitation package is out. We, as the water agency, has contacted the county's firm that's which will help us write the grant proposal, and also touch base with LACO, who's been working on the Stress Basins grant, because there'll be information that needs to be integrated into that application. And so we're hoping to have a kickoff for the next week or two and get the ball rolling on that, and also looking at the other category and just kind of identify any future grant opportunities. But I wanted you to know the solicitation package is out. We're working on that. We also will have LACO back here to present more information on the Stress Basins grant and an update from the previous one as we get closer to finishing it out. So that will be at the November meeting. And we also have an update to our well questionnaire. So we've been working with the Mendocino County Farm Bureau to get that information out. And so we're still looking for some data gaps. So we'll probably be touching base with you, Director Robinson, and Frost Polly, and Devin Jones from the Mendocino County Farm Bureau, and continue that effort. And the county is also doing as much as it can to continue the data process.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Seeing none, we will go on to public comment. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Anyone that would like to speak, please come forward.
Good afternoon, Board. Tamara Alanis, Russian River Flood Control. I just wanted to very briefly introduce to this board an effort that's going on down at the university at Berkeley. The CLE, as they call themselves, the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, was obtained, I guess you would call it, hired by Department of Water Resources to look into how the state will implement and enforce the surface groundwater interaction component of SGMA, which we're very familiar with because that's why our basin was classified and what we're dealing with in our analyses. This group is putting together a paper with recommendations, including some case studies. They would like to include our situation in their case study list. Primarily, I just had 3 takeaways that I wanted to share with you today. 1, in their direction on how to implement surface to groundwater interactions, they're very aware that there's uncertainty in data in situations like ours, and that uncertainty has to be accepted to some point. That our groundwater sustainability plan in the end could not necessarily be deemed complete due to data gaps without something from this group saying data gaps have to be accepted. We have to be able to move forward as a GSA on implementing our plan without having to spend, say, what, $1 billion. I mean, we could spend all the money that we could on these studies and end up with the same results that we're getting with some of the discretized data that LACO's doing and some of the information that we have as background for these studies already. So the second takeaway that I would like to share with you is that in the end of this meeting, oh, and I would just point out that I was alerted to this effort by Jay Jaspers at Sonoma County Water Agency, who was involved very early on in the process, and who, after being having a request from this group to potentially do a case study in Ukiah, he referred them to our group to ensure that we were involved in that process. So I was able to go down there. I didn't have very much notice, but it was very valuable. So the takeaway, the second takeaway, is that they are not going to try to be very prescriptive. I think that they're looking at really a more broad implementation structure. And then thirdly, anything that they put together, they're going to circulate the drafts for our review. I spoke with the leader of this effort, whose name is Michael Kaparsky, and he's a lawyer. There's a lot of lawyers and academics in this group primarily. They're going to provide me with that information before it's distributed, and I'll be able to share it with this group and staff members to make sure that, you know, it really, that we're on board with it and that we're willing to kind of endorse it. So we don't know if we're able to or willing to do that until we see it, and I hope to see that by the end of this year. Just kind of a brief upfront intro. Expect some sort of deliverable down the pike that will hopefully be to our best interest. Thanks.
And I'd just like to say that's more of a reason to get our TAC formed. So maybe we can have a group review.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Aaron? And please state your name for the record.
Sure. Aaron Cuthbertson, California Department of Water Resources. I just wanted to introduce myself. I participated in some of the meetings early on in the GSA formation, and glad to see that you guys were successful in that effort. And I'll be attending some meetings periodically as you guys go forward, as many as I can.
Great.
And I'm here to help if you have any questions. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public expression? Okay. Seeing no others, we'll move on to item 6 on our agenda, and this is an action item. It says action items, but actually this is a draft of our bylaws, and I believe for actual approval, it will come forward at our October meeting. And I'd like to introduce to you Mendocino County Chief Deputy County Counsel that assisted Sarah and I when we took it over to legal as requested by this group to actually go through it. So would you like to take it on and explain? There were some items that County Counsel identified that should be changed, and so we asked him to be here so we could go through it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I believe everyone should have a red line. Our office was asked to conduct some review of the draft bylaws. We do have a few proposed changes, and I'd just like to go through them one by one, explain them, and see if anyone has any questions. The first proposed change is on the page numbered 4 under section 3.4 agenda. And I'll give everyone a chance to flip to the right page. So starting under section 3.4, there was a 7-day minimum requirement to get the information to the get the information in for an item for the proposed agenda. We just inserted some language that said for any regular meeting to make clear that that wouldn't apply to a special meeting, which may be held on shorter notice. and then later in that section added the sentence that said that nothing herein shall prohibit the board from considering any late submitted or emergency item to the extent permitted by the Brown Act. And that was just to make sure that the bylaws ensured that this body had the flexibility in the event of an emergency or late submitted item to be able to address it. Moving down the next section on the following page, 3.6, the proposed change was to insert, this was discussing rules of order, and we just inserted the phrase or applicable statute, regulation, or other law, just to indicate that there may be other sources of legal authority other than the rules of order and bylaws that might govern some of the processes that the JPA board has to follow. Moving on down, and please stop me if I'm going too fast or if there are any questions. Section 4.2, this was pertaining to the election of officers. We inserted one sentence there that would indicate that at the expiration of the term, the office would continue to be filled by the prior person in that office until such time as a successor is appointed. That sort of thing is not necessary, but it is quite common in order to make sure that there's no sort of gap in the performance of duties. Section 4.3 was covering removal of, it was previously labeled removal of officers. The title was just changed to removal of directors. That section actually deals not so much with removal of someone from an office of the board, but from membership on the board itself. And so that change was made for clarity. Under section 4.4, just added in removal of officers to address the process in the event that someone would need to be removed from office during the time of their term, and that was set as a majority vote. I'm kind of guessing there as to what the intent of the board might be as to process, but majority is the one I'm most familiar with seeing. Moving on down, 4.7, talking about the responsibilities of officers, chair of the board. The prior language had referred to the chair enforcing rules of order consistent with Robert's rules. That lends a certain amount of ambiguity in the possibility of a contention that enforcement of a rule that was somehow varying from rules of orders would be invalid. The new language that was proposed was simply that the chair shall rule on the questions of procedure unless overruled by the board. That would retain the option for the board to overrule the chair, but would make clear what the process is. Moving on down a little bit here, Article 5 on page 6, 5.2 referred to working groups. My understanding of this section was it was intended to govern only ad hoc committees, but there was nothing expressly limiting it there. So as to the membership, there was simply an addition at the end, to the extent permitted by law. That way, it is clear that it's being limited insofar as there are restrictions under the Brown Act. Moving down a little bit more, 5.4.6, this is not strictly speaking necessary, but was added for the purpose of clarity. Right now, with respect to the Technical Advisory Committee, it indicates that every member shall have a representative on the TAC, but there was no restriction as to whether or not the member could be a director or not. That leaves, at least theoretically, the possibility that your TAC might end up with a quorum of your full board. And if that's the case, you just need to be aware that that's going to be any meeting of the TAC that has the quorum of the full board, there would be a joint meeting of the board as well. There are reasons you might want to avoid that in terms of the composition. It does tend to make things a little bit confusing in terms of the process and the noticing. I added the language there in 5.4.6 to be clear that it would need to be treated as such in the event that that was the composition of your TAC. And just that's a little bit of a potential complication to run into. So it does highlight that and just make everyone aware of what you'll need to do in that event.
I have a question, if you could.
Sure.
You know, we have like alternates do they count as also?
You know, I don't believe that appointing the alternate to the TAC would constitute a quorum in the event that they're not serving in the capacity of the member of the JPA board. But that may be something I may want to just take a little bit of a closer look at and make sure that there's no issue prior to your next meeting.
Yes, and with the board's permission, I can work with Mr. Curtis on that and see what he discovers. So we might have some more language then that would appear in the final draft in October.
A quorum of this board is 4 out of the 6 seats. So what you're describing there is we could not have, or we may wish to consider the implications if there are 4 board members present.
Right. And in particular, so there is a bit of a carve out if you have a standing committee and you have someone who's not on the TAC but is simply observing in the audience of a meeting of the TAC. There's an exception in the Brown Act that's clear that it allows that to not have to be treated as a joint meeting of the full body. The issue would be if you had a quorum on the TAC itself, then any meeting of the TAC would also be a joint meeting of this body.
Got it.
Article 6, so this was an area where there was a bit more detail in terms of the staffing model than it seemed needed to be put into the bylaws itself. You know, obviously the board has some discretion in terms of how you structure this, but I will say from my experience, I've dealt with some entities that after they've been around for a while, they kind of forget what is in the bylaws versus what is simply accomplished by resolution or MOU. I deleted some of the specific sections here and added some language just to give the board the option to change the staffing model by resolution, just so that you wouldn't have to go back and modify your bylaws every time you have a change in the way that you want to handle the staffing issues. I'm assuming that that's consistent with you know, what the board would want and what its intent was, but this was the language I proposed to that effect. So that involved some modifications to 6.1 and some deletions under 6.1 and under 6.2. Under 6.3, this section governed the treasurer and the controller functions. There are a few changes I proposed here, one of which was simply to keep it closer to the statutory language that's in Government Code section 6505 and 6505.5. There was some language here that got a little bit away from that, and just in terms of whether there's any issue as to whether you're complying with the statute or not, I generally find that it's simpler just to refer to the bylaw, or sorry, refer in the bylaws to the applicable statute and to adhere as closely as possible to that model. This would involve deleting some of the language about a trust account. I did have an opportunity to speak with the auditor, and my understanding is what the county is kind of colloquially referred to as a trust account is not actually a trust. It's just a term that's been used to refer to a more simplified type of accounting, and that's something that he didn't particularly need in the bylaws to be able to go with that type of model, and that what the bylaws could simply do is refer to the treasurer for the county being the treasurer for the JPA as is provided in 6505.5, and then providing that the auditor perform the functions of the controller as provided in that same section. And then I moved there was a discussion of the audit under the treasurer's duties, and I believe as it's put out in the code that would be more consistent with the duties of the controller and the auditor. In part, that's sort of a control issue. It's making sure that the person performing the functions of the audit isn't the same person that is the treasurer, so that there's a little bit of oversight and cross-checking there. And then 6.5, just the deletion of the word collaborative to be consistent with the the changes up in 6.1, again, trying to recognize that there'd be some flexibility in the staffing and that the board would be able to address that through resolution or other appropriate action. And moving on down a little bit, 7.4, I deleted the reference to the treasurer making the deposits into the trust accounts there, just to be consistent with the prior change up above, and deleting the reference to trust accounts specifically. And then moving on down, page 12, there was a provision in there that provided for inspection rights. That sort of thing is fairly common with respect to corporate governance, but the JPA would be governed by the Public Records Act, so there already would be a right of any of the members to go in ahead and inspect the public records. The complication that you might have is that if there's any records that wouldn't be public and would need to be kept confidential for some reason, under Government Code Section 6254.5, there's a provision that a disclosure can be a waiver. So if it's disclosed to one of the members by the JPA, conceptually that could be a waiver as to the entire world. And what you'd want to do in that sort of scenario is craft a confidentiality agreement. They're explicitly provided for among governmental agencies under that code section, but you just need to address them on a case-by-case basis and make sure that you had them in place. And having this sort of open inspection rights, there's a little bit of a danger that if it's covering confidential material, that it might be argued by someone to be a waiver of that at some point down the road. So for that reason, I suggested just deleting sections 10.3, 10.4, and 10.5 just to rely on the Public Records Act and then any further agreements that you might reach with the member agencies down the road. And I think that was the last change that I had proposed. So any questions?
I have one question. We skipped over back on page 5, up in the Article 4.1. There was just a comment there, which I think was sort of asking a question that we need to answer. I may understand this correctly. So the language as written is clear that it covers stakeholder directors. That's my understanding of the intent of this, and that is how this would read. I just wasn't quite sure when I had first read it whether that was the case. And if for any reason that weren't the board's intent, you'd want to rephrase that. Well, I don't remember if we discussed that particularly before. Do you?
That stakeholder members can be officers. I don't think we really talked about it, but we do have an officer that is a stakeholder member.
I think I don't have any objection to it. I think it's fine. I just want to make sure that that's what we. Yeah. I guess we did by.
Well, yeah, I think we did.
We said, yeah, we're going to do that. So, yeah, we're going to do that.
So any other questions? Do we have any public comment to the bylaws? Oh, sorry.
No problem. What are the procedures for amending the bylaws at a future date?
I know that was provided in here, and I don't immediately remember what it was. There was some more, it's more than just resolution. You'd put in the bylaws a slightly more onerous process, and if you give me a second, I should be able to find it.
Article 12.
Thank you. So yeah, it looks like you put in there that you were requiring that you give yourselves at least 30 days notice prior to making any amendments to the bylaws. And then of course you'd want to make sure that you were explicitly noticing whatever action you were taking, not merely as that action, but as an amendment of the bylaws as well. So for example, if you decided to keep in the requirement that the staffing model be contained in the bylaws and have to be amended as part of the bylaws, if you wanted to change a staffing, or you wanted to make a staffing decision that would be contrary to that model, you'd want to make sure that you noticed it at 30 days out and went ahead and provided that you were amending the bylaws to reflect that change.
So we already have 7-day notice on those types of items for the most part, so this just adds an extra 3 weeks to that.
The 7 days for putting together the agenda, but for all of these public meetings, it's 70. I think we do 72 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, this would be an additional notice.
Any other questions? Oh, please come forward. State your name for the record.
Tamara Alanis, Russian River Flood Control. When I read that, I see 30-day notice given to the other board members. But you mentioned a public notice, so I'm just wondering, is it public notice as in public notice like the Brown Act, or is it 30-day notification to the other board members for their consideration at the next meeting? Thank you.
If I may respond, this does refer to notice to members of the board rather than publication.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Our vice chair, Mr. Crane, isn't here. So maybe we need to contact him and make sure that he's gone over these bylaws and what the changes are. And if he has questions, we'll get back to him. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that when we get ready to go and for the meeting in October, his questions are answered if he has any.
Sarah DeCat, Mendocino County. Yeah, we can check in with Director Crane to see if he has any additional questions. We'll also follow up on the question from Director White from earlier, and ideally we'll have a clean copy for adoption at the October meeting.
Okay. Does that work for everybody?
Yep.
Then we'll be good to go on that. Yes.
I just want to make a comment. I want to thank you for getting into the weeds on this stuff and coming up with what to me seemed like really good improvements on what was there to begin with. And I'm glad somebody actually does that sort of thing, because that is not my cup of tea. So thank you.
Glad to help.
Mr. Curtis is great at this. We took his time for 2 different days. So, all righty. Then we're going to move on to the next item. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glad to help.
Great. And you and Sarah will collaborate and have a final draft copy ready to go for our October meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item is to discuss the development of a Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, a memorandum of understanding between the agency, the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, Sonoma County Water Agency, and the California Land Stewardship Institute. So we need to review the draft Ukiah Valley TAC framework. And so how do you want to go forward on this?
I'll Sarah DeCat, Mendocino County, just kind of kick it off to give you, we'll have to rewind and go back in time to when we had our formation committee, and we first had the initial talks about an MOU, and Sonoma County worked on this kind of draft document, which you have in your packet, and it's just a framework. It's not a final MOU or anything. And then in July, you guys also included the California Land Steward Institute as a seat on the TAC, and we were requested to bring back this item, so I invite your input here, but also for Dawn from Sonoma County Water Agency to come up. And I know Tamara was also on, I think you were on the working group for the initial MOU, and kind of start the discussion of where do we go from here, and working on an MOU so that we can be ready when we start doing the work next year.
Okay. Dawn, Seamers, Tamara, please come up. You want to sit rather than stand, or?
Yes, Don Seymour, Sonoma County Water Agency. So as Sarah indicated, we did get together in the late winter, early spring. It was an ad hoc of the proposed TAC members. It was made up of a staff from the Water Agency, the Flood Control District, and RCD. We went through a couple of revisions. As is mentioned, it is just a framework, ideas that we thought could be incorporated in the MOU. in light of, you know, a lot of other initiatives that are going on. There's the initiative for reforming the Upper Russian River Water Managers Group, where this could tie into. Obviously, a very important initiative going on is the relicensing of Powder Valley Project and the collaboration that's going to be necessary, and all these kind of feed into one another. So we threw out there a lot of aspects we thought that the group could coordinate on, also in representing in helping out the GSA as for providing technical advice.
Okay,
Sorry. Tamara Alanis, Russian River Flood Control. Yes, I would agree with what Don said. I would also just point out that from my recollection, the only concern that was expressed was the scope of the activities and programs of mutual benefit on the last page of the MOU. And I think as far as direction from this board goes, you know, thinking about it, I would think that we would want to have kind of as broad of a topical approach to those items that are of mutual benefit in the beginning, so that we don't adopt something that eventually limits us from what we can work on. So I think the concerns that were expressed were that there's so much here that potentially could grow into a huge scope of work for the TAC that was outside of the scope of this board. But just reading through these items, I don't think that there's anything here that's mutually exclusive to Sigma that we should potentially, you know, get rid of because it's not compatible with Sigma. Again, I would just emphasize, I think, the importance of possible consideration of keeping a wide breadth of possible programs and activities so that we don't cut ourselves short early on before we really know what we actually have to do.
Yeah, and as Tamara mentioned, this was shared at one of the formation meetings, I believe in April or May. It was right before you were taking it to your boards for adoption, and that was brought up. But we also requested that if anybody had any comments to get back, we provided an email address. They could provide comments. We'd never received any other comments through that process.
Directors, do you have questions? Discussion on the document itself? Director White.
So, obviously, this particular version here is omitting CLSI, but we're all saying it belongs in there. It just hasn't shown up. The one thing that I would hope we can have in here, and I'm not sure if it's in the goals or scope of activities. I think it's really a goal. And I think it's sort of the primary goal to inform how we approach all of the other stuff that could fall into that, which is to clarify the present status of groundwater sustainability in the basin. This is something that is called into question by the fact that we've been listed as a medium priority basin, and we have to come up with a GSA and a GSP. So somebody thinks that we have a problem or potentially have a problem. And before we start fixing things, we should be able to at least identify clearly what that problem is, if there is a problem, or if there's going to be a problem, or if there isn't, which means clarify the present status of groundwater sustainability. And I would hope that this technical group could keep that as a focus of what they're doing, so that we can get an answer to that before we have to make decisions about what to do about it. That's my opinion.
Righty. Any other comments? Do you have a response, staff?
Just something to consider. It could be, we could utilize, because this is, this TAC would it would be nice to have it up and running so that we can address some of these characterizing the basins as we're kind of all starting that process across the Russian River. But you might want to look at maybe bringing back a working group or having that as an action item at the next board, so that you can maybe get a group together that can take this framework and then put it into more of an MOU format and work closely with Sonoma and these other stakeholders to kind of get the ball moving quicker. So that would just be something to consider for the next meeting of taking action.
And I would just refer to item 4 on the framework, scope of activities, and I think those bullet items are meant to broadly address what you're bringing up.
Right. I guess what I'm looking for is to have that stated. If all these things are addressing it, I would like to have it stated so that it remains sort of the central focus of these things, as opposed to just something that happens to be addressed.
So you're recommending it be put into the goals section?
Yeah,
Statement.
well, yeah, wherever it belongs, but yes, I would say it's a goal. I'd say it's sort of the guiding principle that all these other things should be directed towards. Because at some point, we're going to have a plan to address something. I'd like to know what that is.
Well, that is actually a requirement of the GSA to submit, I believe, by 2020. So that is a product that the GSA and then hopefully from support from the TAC will be submitting.
I also like the idea of being explicit about what it is we are looking to investigate and provide technical feedback on.
Well, that definitely will be direction that's given by you, the board, to the technical group.
Maybe we could take that kind of language and add it into the recitals of the MOU, to kind of, usually those are what sets kind of the scope or kind of the picture of what the MOU agreement is. So that might be a great place to put it, is in the recitals.
I agree. I mean, the purpose and intent of the committee is to provide that information to this board. So let's not forget the role either, because the role is an important recitation, if you will.
And I do see that we have one of our stated technical advisory agencies. Patty, do you have any comment? And please state your name for the record, either place, just so we know who's joining.
Hi, I'm Patty Madigan with the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. I'm sorry if I was taking sort of a back seat. I was trying to play catch up a little bit. But I guess my concern is that, the Resource Conservation District, while we're honored to participate in the technical advisory group, we don't have any funding to participate in the technical advisory group. So I think before we sign an MOU, we just have to make sure that we're able to step up and perform according to the expectation of this group, and that's clear that we are not funded specifically to perform any kind of data analysis or document review that would be taking a lot of staff time. We'll do to the best of our ability, and we're appreciative of the county's annual support, but that we may be limited, and that might be a constraint for us.
Okay. And you're very welcome to take a chair over.
Do you mind if I respond just briefly to Patty's comment?
Please do.
I really appreciate your comment, Patty, because, this was something that we've been discussing from the beginning, the limitations on the RCD and what they're able to contribute. And I would just encourage you to, we'll help you find those opportunities that the RCD can contribute in a meeting and in brainstorming and the development of recommendations, kind of as opposed to doing the data and getting all the information together for the recommendation. So I appreciate you saying that, because that'll keep us mindful of the limitations on the RCD.
Anyone else? Public comment or comment from alternates? Don't be so quiet.
No, go ahead, be quiet.
Would I be out of sequence if I had one additional comment?
You can do that.
The first key principle under item 3 there, that surface and groundwater supplies are connected. That kind of stuck out to me in this document, which was a mix of vision and procedure, and that seemed to be the one statement of kind of a claim, a scientific fact. Is it there purposefully for a very firm reason?
It is, because it is well recognized that surface water, groundwater is very interconnected in the Russian River watershed. As a matter of fact, the Water Agency, the State Water Resources Control Board, and County of Mendocino, Upper River Water Agency, and the City of Ukiah are funding a watershed study with the USGS. One of the products of that is a surface water groundwater model. So, and Sigma itself requires that the GSA look at the potential for surface water to be affected by groundwater pumping. So it is a very important component to have in this document.
Up front. I guess what I'm wondering is, wouldn't this be one of the conclusions? Wouldn't this be a focus of the study, the focus of the models that you just described, as opposed to a statement of fact up front? I mean, a lot of the work will be trying to characterize what that interaction looks like.
I agree with you, but it's recognizing that that interaction does exist, and the models and the studies will better identify the extent of that.
I would just add to that, because the statement that surface and groundwater are interconnected is part of the reason why we were classified as a medium priority basin. So that relationship really was already established at the state level for our basin, in saying that, hey, out of all of the Sigma components, degraded water quality, subsidence, all of the negative impacts that Sigma's designed to help curtail or stop, the surface groundwater interaction and negative impacts to surface water from groundwater interaction are the issues that we're trying, as you say, to use our studies to show the breadth of it. Where does it occur? Does it occur? But the statement itself was already made by DWR when they classified our basin as a medium priority basin. None of the other negative impacts that Sigma's identified that need to be addressed are apparent in our basin, with the exception of the surface groundwater interaction.
Mr. White.
Yeah, I think I know what Zach's getting at, and I think that the reason that we're even having this discussion is because we have sort of this built-in confusion in the water law, which is that it controls the surface waters, but groundwater is not under the control of the Department of Water Resources. So you don't need a license to pump your groundwater, but you do need a license or some kind of right for surface water. And then the question becomes, well, is that an underflow well or is that a groundwater well? And there's this whole area where nobody's really able to say, nor do they give any guidance. It's just whatever somebody might want to call it. And so because of that, we have this idea that there is this physical separation. Now, there may be some physical separations if you go deep enough and things like that, but obviously there is connectivity to some extent. And so, you know, we're just really arguing over the confusion that was put into this subject when they didn't talk about it in the way it really is. How it really is still to be understood. We don't have a perfect understanding of that, but you know, I guess that was my reaction to your comment there.
Anyone else? Please come forward. State your name for the record.
Brian Wallace, Laco. I had a question for Aaron. This is regarding the difference between surface water depletion, which is where a groundwater well or an underflow well takes water that is in the stream and pulls it into the well, versus groundwater capture, which is when you have a well that is pulling groundwater that would eventually flow into a surface water resource. And I wanted to know if in the Department of Water Resources eyes those are the same or if they're considered different. Thank you.
It's going to be short.
State your name for the record, please.
Aaron Cuthbertson, Department of Water Resources. I don't know the answer to that offhand, but I can check. And I'll check and get back to you.
Okay, and perhaps that can be also directed to Ms. Duquette, so if you're not here at the next meeting, we can all get that response. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no other speakers, this is possible direction and regarding the development. So I think we've talked it over. Is that enough direction?
The board needs to direct us what they would like us to do from here.
Oh, okay.
We could do a working group. It's really up to you, the kind of structure that you want to do, but what would you like us to do in terms of bringing something back? Who would you like to work on this? That kind of thing.
Okay. Ready to go then. I don't know if anyone on the board would like to be a part of that particular group, but how do you want to move forward?
Well, I had a strong opinion about something I wanted to see stated clearly in there, so I would be willing to participate to the extent to kind of carry that into the group.
Okay, that would be great, so the chair doesn't have to. That would be wonderful if you do that.
Okay.
Okay. So you will have a meeting and get the final verbiage worked out and start writing on the MOU, or is that what you want to hear as a motion?
Sarah Duquette, Mendocino County Water Agency. We would love a motion. I'm just going to reflect what I think I'm hearing is a working group consisting of RCD, Tamara from Flood Control, and the Upper Russian River Water Agency, myself from the county, Dawn, or representative from Sonoma, and a representative from CL.
California Land Stewardship Institute, Laurel Marcus. And she might have to participate by phone if she's got other things going, but that would be great.
And our ultimate goal would be creating a draft MOU for review. Probably not the next meeting, but maybe in November or December having a draft for you guys to look at.
That sounds great. So I'll entertain a motion. Mr. White.
Do you think it's going to take 2 months? I mean, it seems like we need to have this thing going.
Especially if we're going to hear back by the end of the year. But
I don't want to speak for everyone's schedule and guarantee a time until we kind of have a chance to sit down and talk. But the direction could be at the soonest possible meeting, and then from there we can work on schedules and see how quickly we can get it back.
Yeah.
Okay. Will that work?
Sure.
And add Director White to your email list. Okay. So do we have a motion? The chair can't do it. She can't even pass the gavel to the vice chair.
What would the motion sound like?
Well, I think Ms. Duquette stated it. Do you want to restate? Sure. And then you can go, so move.
Yeah, he's ready. He just needs to know what it is.
A motion to create a working group comprised of the County of Sonoma, County of Mendocino, Flood Control, the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, the California
Land
Stewardship Institute, and Director White.
So moved.
Second.
Good. Do we have a second?
Yeah,
Second.
Oh, thank you, Director Brown. And you noticing I'm getting it right
Yeah,
this time.
you did. Today was flawless so far.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Any comment to the motion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. Thank you very much. So our next item, directors' reports. Do we have any reports from the directors?
Nothing from here.
I'm going to be absent next month, and Director Mack from Millview is my alternate. He's going to be in my stead next month.
Sounds good. Thank you, and thank you for being here as well. And do we have another alternate here with us today?
We do. My alternate, Sunny Elliott, is here.
Okay. Sunny, welcome. We appreciate your attendance today as well. All righty. So, when is the next scheduled meeting? It is October 12th?
13th. Nope, 12th.
12.
Sorry, the little calendar's sideways over there.
All right, at 1:30. And I just want to make sure that Vice Chair Crane focuses on the bylaws and looks at changes. So that will need to be done. And City of Ukiah does not have anyone on the technical advisory group. TAC.
Sarah DeCat, Mendocino County. I'd be happy to invite Sean White from the city, should he wish to participate.
Okay, I think that would be good. Okay. Thank you. Are you waiting for the magic words?
Move to adjourn.
We're adjourning.
We're adjourned.